Talk about a wild ride. This was so unexpected. So this is How to Kill Men and Get Away with It by Katie Brent. I don't even know where to begin. So I guess we'll just jump right in and say our main character is Kitty Collins, and she's like an it girl. She is a rich girl. She's like an heiress to this like meat factory. It's this huge industry in the UK, which is also why she's vegan. It kind of goes into childhood trauma around that. But she's also an Instagram influencer. And basically, she becomes a serial killer. That's like the whole point here, but like in a very Dexter like way. So she has rules for herself and she's only trying to rid the world of very bad men. And then things kind of get out of control. I didn't think really that I would like this book when I first started reading it because I personally don't enjoy in general reading about rich people. I'm not into like rich girl drama. I'm not into reading about social media influencers or people who are really beautiful or where their friends are all richer women are getting augmented. Like I'm not interested in that. I don't really, even as someone who's on social media, I don't relate to that world in particular, so I don't like to read about it. But I actually really felt like it was necessary for this book because in one of the subplots, it's very important to this book overall, is that she has a stalker. And that makes things more complicated and more interesting because there's someone out there that's watching everything that she does. And I mean everything. But there was a lot to love about this. It's hilarious. There were twists and turns in this book, and I didn't guess any of them. So that right there, I was like, wow, okay. And I couldn't put it down. I kept wondering, like, I'm like, this can't end well. Like, this is just getting like too over the top, too complicated. Like, how is this going to all go down? Where is this going to go? And it just went all kinds of crazy places, but in a really good way. Like, I totally love this book. And the other thing that was surprising is, like, for some reason, just maybe based on the cover, I thought this was going to be like a cozy murder horror book, similar to like a Rachel Harrison style. It is not. This book had graphic violence in it. There's a lot of gore in this book. The violence and gore escalates as each like murder takes place. So just be aware of that if you're not really into the gore. I felt it was manageable, and I'm someone that really doesn't enjoy body horror. I managed this perfectly fine, but if you're someone that knows like you're really squeamish about certain things, like I wouldn't read it. However, well, I don't know. I mean, just skip those parts because the book is so much fun. And at the end of this book, I was like, where were you? Where were you when I was in my 20s? Like, if you know someone who's going through like a bad breakup, you should give them this book to read because it's just so enjoyable. It's so funny, and it's like a woman's revenge fantasy, I guess. So, and there's a sequel coming out, so I'm definitely going to read the sequel. I don't think it's out yet. I'm not sure when it comes out, if it's the end of this year or sometime next year, but How to Kill Men and Get Away with It was one of the best books that I read this summer, so highly recommend. So the next book I read was also on audio, and this was What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. And this is another typical psychological thriller. So in this book, we're following Naomi, and when she was a child, so we're talking probably another 20, 22 years ago, she and her friends were always hanging out in the woods. She had two best friends, and they were just getting up like into like weird witchy shenanigans in the woods. One day, Naomi gets attacked in the woods when her friends are not around. And it's very violent and very brutal, and it does like talk about it, but it's not like gratuitous. It's nowhere near as like violent and gory as the previous book I was just talking about. But her friends are the ones that do see what has happened, and then she is rescued by someone else. she nearly died, but she survived. But obviously, that's a lot of trauma to deal with. So after she's found and she's rescued and she's recovered, she's interviewed by the police and her friends are interviewed as well. And they end up like finding the killer. So it's a serial killer that they knew was a serial killer but couldn't connect him to previous crimes. And now 20 to 22 years later, he's now dead. And you would think like, oh, everybody's feeling relief, but that is not the case, because she hears from her best friend who feels like now is the time to reveal a secret that they had when they were kids, because there was something else out there in the woods that they knew about at the time that they did not share. And there's reasons why Naomi doesn't want to go public with this. There's reasons why her other best friend doesn't want to go public with this. But now things are starting to get out of control. I have to say the beginning of this book took me a little bit to get into, but once I was in it, I was hooked, especially when she goes back to her hometown to like deal with all of this stuff. However, I picked up on the twist right away in this one as well. First, when I got to the middle of the book, I was starting to question it, but actually it just kind of confirmed what I already knew and just added an additional element to it. But I have to say, like, knowing the twist in this one didn't ruin the reading experience for me. And I think it's because I like the character of Naomi a little bit better than I liked Chloe in A Flicker in the Dark. And I liked the storyline of the friendship part of it, which was missing in the other story. So I would recommend this one. It's a little bit different because, you know, it's what lies in the woods, and you got to find out what the secret is in the woods, which it's just a spoiler. You actually find out what's in the woods, like what their childhood secret is, pretty early on, but then you're trying to figure out like how does this all relate to what happened to Naomi? How does this relate to what is happening currently to her other friends? How it's all tied together. So I would check it out. So the next book I read was Introduction to Sally by Elizabeth von Arnim. This is also literary fiction. It's satire and it's strange and it's hard to talk about, but I recommend it. This is a weird little quirky book. So in this book, we're following this main character, Sally. But Sally, even though she's the main character, she doesn't have a lot of agency throughout more of this book. And because it's satire, she's kind of this flat character. She's very like passive, she's very agreeable. And what this book is really exploring is how everybody else is responding to her more than how she's responding to everyone else. So it's very weird because even though she's the main character and her name is in the title, it's really about like all of these other side characters and how they interact with her and how they relate to her. It's weird. So she's beautiful, like the most beautiful girl who has ever lived. And her parents are freaked out by this. So I'm just gonna say it straight out. This book is about sex, even though it never mentions the word sex. That's basically what this book is about. And I love how that's written, how that's explored, because there's just all this subtext going on, and you just know as a modern day reader, like what this is really about. And you probably knew it back then too, when this came out. So I wonder how this book was received initially, because the parents are freaked out because she's so beautiful and they are worried about protecting her virginity, essentially. And like, how are we going to protect this child? Like, they didn't want to ever let her out of the house because they were like, people would just be staring at her all the time. This happens throughout the whole book. Like, people are literally like following her down the street and everyone is just staring at her all the time. So they're really concerned about this. But luckily, a young gentleman arrives and he falls instantly in love with her, and he decides, like, very early on, like, he's going to marry her. He doesn't think too much about this. And they're like, great, now she's off our hands. So the bulk of this book is about her new marriage and how her husband responds to her and what that relationship is like, which is very bizarre. Also, it's about his relationship with his mother and the relationship that she then has between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, and just the repercussions of his actions because it changes his life getting married in this way, which then changes what's happening in his mother's life, and things start to shift in her personal life. It's all very strange, this domino effect. And then you'll meet all these little characters along the way during their honeymoon, and when they eventually like go back to settle down somewhere, just how other people are not necessarily interfering, but everyone is like so either super protective of her or very like aggressive of like wanting that her all to themselves. Like it's really weird. And she's very confused most of the time. But what I really liked about this book, besides the commentary on sex in that way and on marriage and on family dynamics and how people respond to beauty, is the commentary on language and the commentary on social classes as related to that language. Because a major issue in this marriage, not for Sally, Sally doesn't understand why anything is an issue. It's her relation, like it's how her husband deals with it. So he is like of a higher class. I don't think he's quite an aristocrat, but he's definitely like a higher status than Sally for sure. And she speaks with a lower class accent. She doesn't pronounce her H's, and this is like a big deal. And her husband is trying to train her to speak like a lady, and then her mother-in-law is also trying to train her to speak like a lady. And all of this creates a lot of conflict, but also miscommunication. So I just felt like the commentary on social classes, the commentary on language and how we view people based on the way that they speak, and how in a lot of ways it's like he is happy in this relationship when she's not speaking, essentially. And he feels a lot more like upset with her and embarrassed by her when she's talking. And it's a strange book. That's all I can say. And I feel like everyone should read it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I would give it a try, because I want more people, like this would make a really good book club book, I think, because it's not really like anything else. And I think there's like a lot of good discussion that could go on here, because there were times where I can't figure out like what is the author's perspective on this, because she doesn't show Sally in the best light most of the time other than being beautiful, but like none of the characters are actually shown in a good light. So sometimes it was hard for me to figure out, is she looking down on the lower classes, or is she actually highlighting like how ridiculous the higher classes are? Some of that was a little bit ambiguous to me, and I think it would be cool to talk about this and explore that more deeply. But I do like that about Elizabeth von Arnim, that she has a lot of unlikable, but not like we're doing it modern day. Like I really don't like the trope when we have characters that we just really don't like and it's hard to root for them. There are some things to like that are kind of endearing about each character in a way. And then there's other things where you're like, oh, you're just kind of rolling your eyes. So nobody is perfect in this book. They're all like very unique. And I just, yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep waxing poetic on this, but yeah, just read it. Just read it. The next book I read in August was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. Yes, Taylor. I had to look at my notes because I'm getting all discombobulated now, because I realize like it's taking me forever to record this video and I have to stream in like less than 10 minutes. So let's see how fast I can pull through this. So in this thriller, it's another thriller that I read on audio. This was interesting to me. The first, I would say 20 to 30% of the book, I was in and out of focus on. It was very slow going. I was not sure if I was even going to like it. And in this book, we're following our main character, and she is house sitting she has her own backstory that we don't know about at the start of the book. It's just kind of weaved in because she has like this mysterious past. But she's house sitting and she's recommended this book to read. So she reads it and it's trash. It's a horror book, but it's awful. She goes on Amazon and gives it a 1-star review. And the author writes back and asks her to remove the review. And they have a back and forth because she's refusing to remove this. And then he sends her like this ominous, threatening message. So it is more of a home invasion style thriller that's really not giving anything away. Someone shows up. Is it the author? Maybe. If not, who is it? And it's really like a night or two of survival in this house and how she kind of gets through that. There were twists and turns in it. I wouldn't say that I was really predicting anything because I thought just going into it what it was, and it does kind of relate to those things. So it's not, I don't feel like it's a big twisty kind of book in the way that we think of like big twists. Instead, it's more like it's an over-the-top thing where all of these crazy escalations are happening and we're like, whoa, what is going to happen here? That said, I enjoyed how I felt, at least with this one, it was very like tongue-in-cheek and not taking itself too seriously. It was having a lot of commentary on the tropes that we see in writing, for better or worse, and kind of making fun of them and kind of playing around with them. So it was like, you know, she's writing a review about this horror book, but now she's kind of living out, this main character is living out her own horror book, right? So is she going to follow those tropes that she doesn't like? How is she going to do things differently? And knowing that we have a writer who's writing this book. There's also like a secondary, I won't call it like a dual timeline, but a second narration that's woven in there from a different character's point of view. That's interesting as well. So overall, it was a wild ride. It was very hard for me to get into it, but once the invasion part happens, it moves very quickly. It was a wild ride. I will say, and I hate to be a spoiler alert person, but if you're concerned about any type of violence or interaction that involves like animals, you might not like this book, but I think you should still give it a chance. That's all I would say, because I would want to know that because I have dogs. So she does have a dog as well. So just be aware, because that does heighten a lot of suspense and what is happening here. But I think if you can push yourself through that, it's still worth reading. This was the most fun thriller that I read this month. So I enjoyed this one best on audio, and then What Lies in the Woods, and then A Flicker in the Dark third. So if that sounds fun to you, I mean, a lot of people, I felt like this was a controversial book on Goodreads. People either really enjoyed it or really disliked it, and I'm just one of the people that really liked it. I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed that premise of just the whole writing and 1-star review and just all the commentary about writing tropes. So if you're a nerdy like reader like that, you'll probably get a kick out of this. So I recommend it. So I got to read The Disappearance of Trudy Solomon by Marcy McCreary, and she was one of the writers that I met in July, and it was at a cool little event at my local Barnes & Nobles. So I got an autographed copy, and I didn't know if I would like this book because it's a police procedural, and I've never really read any of those. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I think it's pretty cool because we have our main character, she follows in her father's footsteps and she becomes a police officer, and there's interesting subplots going on here. So there's the subplot with her mother who has alcoholism, and also there's the relationship of her and her father because they get together to work on one of his old cold cases, when it is discovered that a woman that went missing when he was a cop and he was like super obsessed with this case, they find her. They find her very early on in this book, so it's not a spoiler, in a nursing home, an assisted living facility with early onset dementia. And they're trying to figure out, like, but what happened to her? Like, what happened in the years between when she disappeared and when she was discovered? And one of the main reasons why they have to team up and do this is because she's the main character. He was injured on the job, but also she's under investigation. And this is where I have mixed feelings about this book because it was very suspenseful, very well written. I liked the subplots of her family situation. I enjoyed the overall suspense of trying to figure out what had happened to this missing woman. However, she is on leave because she was injured on the job, but also she shot a young man of color and she felt or believed that he was holding a gun, but they found no evidence of a gun. And now she's trying to have to prove her innocence. And I know that the author at the talk had talked about how she wanted to write about the Black Lives Matter movement. She wanted to write about these current events. And I'm not really sure about how I feel about how this was handled, because obviously, like, I don't want to give spoilers about the ending of that, but obviously the series continues, so we know that she kept her job. And so I guess we do have to spoil this a little bit. You know, I guess the issue is it was interesting in the sense that she has to talk to these different people. So she's talking to, because she was someone who's very heavily involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. So she's trying to have them kind of support her because obviously, like, cops shooting unarmed people of color is a problem. And she wanted the support of this movement, but they're like, we can't really help you with this. Like, you're kind of on your own a little bit. And then she also meets this other young man of color who is living with her mom temporarily and also helping around the house. And he's a college student. And there are positive interactions throughout the book. But it kind of sets up this dynamic that was kind of awkward or confusing, where a lot of the antagonists in this subplot were people of color, because obviously they're not happy with a white woman cop who has shot one of their own, and with everything going on, like, and with no evidence of this gun, and with him being so young, rightfully so, like, they would be upset about this. So she does end up in these situations where she's being threatened. And I guess I just have a lot of, like, mixed feelings about this, because I just wonder if this was the right story for a white author to tell. I just have to be honest about that. I don't think that she's done anything wrong. I don't think that, like, she should be canceled. I just feel like I'm not sure why she and her editors didn't have more of a conversation about how this might be perceived. Yeah, I don't really know what more to say about it. I'm going to continue with the series. I enjoyed the writing in the story. But that part of it, I do have, like, mixed feelings about. And yeah, I guess that's all I want to say about that. I mean, I'd be interested in, I think, like, if the premise sounds interesting to you, and like I said, the main storyline was very interesting. Please come back if you read it and let me know what your thoughts were on some of that, because I just have conflicting feelings about that. I just feel a lot of things. I don't know. And I'm feeling uncomfortable. So if that's why it seems like I'm not able to like really express myself, it's because I feel that level of discomfort where I'm not sure and I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I think the author is a really nice person. I think she wrote a good book. But I just wonder, like, was this the right subplot for a white author to tell? So the last book that I managed to squeeze in August was Bad Dolls by Rachel Harrison. And I am not someone who normally loves short stories. Full disclosure, I am a novel girly all the way. But I really enjoyed this collection. It's just 4 short stories. The whole thing is it's under 200 pages, so it's about 187 pages. So each short story is pretty chunky and well developed. So I guess I'll just talk briefly about each one without giving too many spoilers away. So, like I said, I enjoyed all of these short stories. My favorite in this collection was Bachelorette because it was very reminiscent of The Return. So once again, we have a group of friends together for a bachelorette party that goes in a really weird direction, and there's like horror in that, obviously. And I love the way she explores female friendships. I really do. So even though it was reminiscent of The Return, it was still very different in its own individual story. But I'm curious, and I hope that I can remember to ask her this when I go to her event in September, if she wrote this story first and then was like, oh no, actually I want to explore this in a novel, or if she had written the novel first and was like, you know what, I still want to explore another aspect of female friendships. So I'll have to ask her about that. My next favorite story in the collection was probably Bad Dolls. That's the last story in the collection, and that one is dealing with grief. It's dealing with family relationships. It's dealing also not just with the grief of a loss of a loved one, but also of when our lives don't turn out the way that we had hoped and anticipated. And there's a creepy bad doll in the story, and I always love a cursed object kind of doll, or a cursed object, I meant to say. So I really enjoyed that story. And then I really enjoyed the first one as well, called, what was that one called? Reply Hazy, Try Again. And it's about a magic 8-ball. And this story is not, I was surprised that this was the first one in there, but I think it was good that it was, because this one is very like low key on the horror. In fact, at the end of it, I was like, it didn't feel like horror to me. It felt just like supernatural. It just felt like kind of weird, but it was very cute. And I liked the themes explored in it, once again, about, dealing with our own anxieties and not having all of the answers and seeking outside of ourselves for advice. So I really enjoyed that story. I would reread these for sure. I think she's an incredible writer. She's my favorite. And then the last story, The Goblin, was my least favorite. It's still a good story. I think what makes it my least favorite, though, is just that I'm not really interested in that subject matter. So a lot of it is dealing with eating disorders, diet culture, and those kind of topics. And I just really don't like those. But there was definite horror in that one. Also, the other aspect of it is I felt like that story was the shortest one, I believe. And I would have liked the main character's backstory to be fleshed out a little bit more in some ways. I think we got a lot of that in The Bachelorette of the main character and even in Bad Dolls. But the first two, I feel like you don't know as much about their backstory. Not that you need a whole info dump on that, but there were just things that happened in The Goblin that I was like, but I don't understand enough about this character to understand like why certain things are happening. But still, I mean, it was a fun little read. That one was, I don't know, in some ways a lot darker than the other 3 in the collection, but it's still a good story. It's super weird. There's horror in it. I mean, it's Rachel Harrison. It's not a bad story. It's just the one that if I'm putting in the order, that was just the last place winner. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.